You may know what a baseline is, but do you know what organizations have to do to create an organizationally defined or an organizationally tailored baseline? That's what this module is all about. Stay tuned and you'll learn more about creating a tailored baseline for your organization. In this video, we'll be talking about organizationally tailored control baselines and cybersecurity framework profiles. This is task P4, or prepare for, in the RMF, and it applies at the organizational level. Again, task P4 is organizationally tailored control baselines and or cybersecurity framework profiles are established and made available. Inputs to this task are organizationally tailored control baselines that already exist, mission or business objectives, the enterprise architecture, the enterprise security architecture, the privacy architecture, and organization and system level risk assessment results that were created in task P3, and also a list of common control providers and common controls available for inheritance. So in this task, we're going to create baselines that are specific for systems in our organization. This is a common practice used by a lot of organizations. Expected outputs from this task are a list of approved or directed organizationally tailored control baselines. That's what's going to come out of this task. So this, again, conducted at the organization level, not the system level. This is going to define a set of controls that can be used for specific systems or types of systems. Primary responsibility for this task is the mission or business owner and or the senior accountable official for risk management. Supporting roles are the Chief Information Officer, the authorizing official, or we like to call them the AO, or the authorizing official's designated representative. Also the Senior Agency Information Security Officer. Some places they call that person the Chief Information Security Officer or the Chief Security Officer, CSO or CISO. Also the Senior Agency Official for Privacy. Of course, all important people that help get this task done. So before we go into talking about defining control baselines, it's important to define a couple things. And one of those is, what is a control? So NIST has a couple of definitions we can look at. So a control, and in this case we're talking about security and privacy controls, is the means of managing risk, including policies, procedures, guidelines, practices, or organizational structures, which can be administrative, technical, management, or legal in nature. An attribute assigned to an asset that reflects its relative importance or necessity in achieving or contributing to the achievement of stated goals. That's one definition. The second definition I like a little better, also from NIST, is security control, a safeguard or countermeasure prescribed for an information system or an organization designed to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of its information and meet a set of defined security requirements. And obviously, in RMF2 and the Control Catalog Revision 5, we're talking about security controls and also privacy controls. But I think the second one, if we think about a safeguard or countermeasure that's protecting security and privacy, is a good way to think of a control. It's those things we put in place. Like a good example of a control is a password length is a control. A password is a control. The lock on your car is a security control, right? It provides protection to the car. So another thing we need to think about is, what is a control baseline, right? And this is by NIST also. It's a set of controls that are applicable to an information or information system to meet legal, regulatory, or policy requirements, as well as address the protection needs for the purpose of managing risk. So we're going to say, this is a group of controls that we put on a system that are going to provide the protections necessary for security and privacy, as well as regulatory requirements. So these are those controls that a system must implement in order to be secure. So what we're going to do is we want to start with the generic baseline in most cases. So NIST Special Publication 853 Revision 5 identifies controls that make up 3 specific baselines for systems based on system and information risk and criticality. So the baselines we normally use when we're talking about NIST are low, moderate, and high. Now I know when we go into talking about the Department of Defense, or we talk about the intelligence community, they have a different method for developing baselines that uses the 3 security objectives. So you'll have an individual classification for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And in those cases, we'll see it as low, 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 moderate, high, something like that, where you'll have a classification for each of the security objectives. That's a little foreshadowing. We won't go into that any more depth in this topic, because right now we're going to talk about the basics of creating these baselines, and we'll cover the DoD and the intelligence community's development of baselines in a later subject. So think about this. We're talking about low, moderate, and high as they're defined by NIST and as they're defined in NIST Special Publication 853, Revision 5, which defines the controls, and NIST Special Publication 853 Bravo, or B, that defines baselines. So if we think about NIST Special Publication 853 Bravo, the low baseline contains 184 controls and enhancements. The moderate baseline contains 323 controls and enhancements, and the high baseline contains 409 controls and enhancements. There's also a privacy baseline that contains 86 controls and enhancements, and these numbers can go up a little bit depending on how privacy is implemented in your system. For example, additional controls can be added to the low baseline if PII is of concern. The first thing we need to think about is the mission and business need. So to address the organization mission or business need for a specialized set of controls to reduce risk, organizationally tailored control baselines may be developed for organization-wide use. An organizationally tailored baseline provides a fully specified set of controls, control enhancements, and supplemental guidance derived from established control baselines described in Special Publication 853 Bravo. So essentially we're saying we're going to start with that template. We're going to start with a template that comes from one of these control baselines, the low, moderate, or high, generally. We're going to take that baseline and we're going to add additional controls, and we may even remove controls that don't apply to the system, and then we're going to save that as an organizationally defined baseline. So we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to think about is mission and business need, right? So one of the things we can think about, if we're building, say, a baseline for maybe a satellite, if we're building a baseline for a satellite, maybe the requirements for something like physical access control aren't going to be applicable because the satellite will be in space and there's no way to put those physical controls in place. So we have to think about the mission need of the system and the business need of the system. So in some military systems, some defense systems, some weapon systems, there's not a login screen, for example. You wouldn't want to try to fire a missile system and have to log into it first, right? So in some systems, those controls have been tailored out, and it provides a specific baseline for those systems so that we don't have to always tailor out a bunch of controls. So that's what we're trying to do here. So the tailoring process is the first thing we want to think about once we define the baseline we're going to start with from 853 Bravo. The tailoring process can also be guided and informed by the requirements engineering process described in Special Publication 800-160 of Volume 1. Organizations can use the tailored control baseline concept when there is a divergent from specific assumptions used to create the initial baselines in 853 Bravo. This would include situations where the organization has specific security or privacy risks, or has a specific mission or business need, or plans to operate in environments that are not addressed in the initial baselines. This is when we're going to tailor, and we're going to talk a lot about tailoring when we get to the select task. So it's important to think we're tailoring. Essentially, all we're talking about when we're talking about tailoring is We're going to remove controls that don't make sense, and we're going to add controls that need to be added for the specific system. So we're making the baseline fit the system that we're building it for. And generally, this is going to be a number of systems. Maybe it's going to be all systems that are deployed to a specific region or area. Or maybe they're going to be the systems that are doing a specific mission. So organizational requirements are also important. Organizationally tailored baseline complement the NIST control baselines by providing an opportunity to add or eliminate controls to accommodate organizational requirements while continuing to protect information commensurate with risk. Multiple customized baselines may be useful for organizations with heterogeneous systems. You can build as many baselines as you want for your organization, and it's going to help the information system owner if they know, for example, that they're building a Linux system that's going to be used as a web server. They can get a Linux web server baseline, or maybe even just a web server baseline, and it's going to define all the controls that need to be put in place for a web server. That'll mean specific controls have been added to protect a server that's facing the internet, that's hosting web services. So we'll build these baselines for specific situations. And again, at the organizational level. There are examples and justifications. So to customize control baselines by describing control applicability and by providing interpretations for specific technologies, types of missions or business functions, operations, systems, and environments of operations and operating modes. So we can build baselines for a number of reasons. Maybe we're operating in a system that's providing a display that's always going to be on. So in that case, we would not want to have something like a screensaver in use. So we'd build that into the control baseline. Or maybe we're building a baseline for a wireless system that needs specific controls put in place. So again, we can add and remove controls based on the needs of the system and the protection levels required by the risk management process. We can also tailor in parameter values. And when we start talking about controls later, we'll really get deeper into these parameter values. Organizationally tailored baselines can establish organizationally defined control parameter values for assignment or selection in statements, in controls and control enhancements that are agreeable to specific communities of interest and can also extend to the supplemental guide when necessary. Tailored baselines may be more or less stringent than those baselines identified in 853B are applied to multiple systems. So we're talking about parameter values. We're talking about specific areas that NIST has left a value open for the organization to provide some type of value, a number. For example, there's a control that says there's a specific number of times that a user can enter a bad password before the system is locked. Many organizations will say that's 3 or 5. Your situation may be this system is so critical that we're going to only allow 1 bad password before the system is locked. That means we've changed that parameter value from 3 to 1. Or maybe we're going to allow more. Maybe we're going to say there's 10 bad passwords before the system is locked. So we change that value to 10. In our baseline, we can not only adjust the controls that are added or removed, but we can go into these variables and modify the variables based on the requirements for the systems that we're building this baseline for and in alignment with the risk management process. We can also have baselines for externally provided systems, or we could have baselines provided by external providers. So tailored baselines developed outside the organization may also be mandated for certain laws, executive orders, directives, regulations, policies, or standards. In some situations, tailoring actions may be restricted or limited by the developer of a tailored baseline or the issuing authority for a tailored baseline. And this is a good example of this is maybe you're in the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense through DISA, or the Defense Information Systems Agency, maybe has issued a baseline for web servers. And they're going to say, you're going to use this on all DoD web servers. So at the Army level, Department of the Army level, they'll take that baseline and they'll apply it to their web servers. There may be a requirement that this baseline cannot be modified by that lower unit. It can't be modified by the Army. It has to be implemented as the DoD said it. That may not always be the case. There may be a case where some variables and some controls can be tailored. So there's restrictions and limitations to how you can modify the baseline if it's been issued by a higher authority. And there's certain laws and executive orders that may require baseline to be used. So, for example, if you're using privacy information, there may be a PII baseline that you have to use that's based on a legal requirement. There's a lot of groups that we can kind of use to determine what baselines we want to build. Tailored baselines, and sometimes we'll use the term overlays, and overlays do essentially function the same way a baseline works. They've been developed by communities of interest for cloud and shared systems, services, and applications, industrial control systems, or ICSs, privacy and privacy risks, national security systems, weapons and space-based systems, high-value assets, mobile device management, and public key infrastructure, or PKI. These are examples of baselines that exist today and that can be developed for your organization as well. Organizations may also benefit from developing one or more cybersecurity framework profiles. A cybersecurity framework profile uses the subcategories in the framework core to align cybersecurity outcomes with mission or business requirements, risk tolerance, and resources of the organization. It just helps align the RMF a little more with the CSF. The prioritized list of cybersecurity outcomes developed at the organization and mission business process levels can be helpful in facilitating consistent, risk-based decisions at the system level, and subcategories identified in the applicable cybersecurity framework profile can also be used to guide and inform the development of the tailored control baselines that we talked about earlier. So we can build these things at the organizational level, and it makes it easier to implement them at the system level. So once we're done with the prepare step with all the tasks that apply to the organization, we'll go on to developing the RMF for the system level, and then go into implementing the RMF at the system level. So this development of cybersecurity framework profiles or control baselines at the organizational level only helps speed the development of systems at the information system level. So references to this topic are Special Publication 853, Revision 5, Special Publication 853 Bravo, which as the time of this recording is still in draft, Special Publication 800-160, Volume 1, Mission or Business Analysis and Stakeholder Needs, Requirements, Definition, Processes, and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Core Profiles. In closing, in this topic we talked about the task overview for this task, the inputs and outputs, the responsibility. We talked about the definition of controls and control baselines. We looked at Special Publication 853, Revision 5, and 853 Bravo. Statistics. We talked about the tailoring process. We talked about organizational requirements, justification, parameter values, and externally developed baselines, and the cybersecurity framework, as well as references. So these are things you should know. You should have a good grasp, at least at the high level, when you're leaving this topic. If you don't, I suggest you go back and check those topics out that don't look familiar to you, and we'll see you in the next lesson.